Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. Today I'm going to try something a bit different. My channel's still quite young. I'm still messing around with formats and things to do. And so what I'm going to try today is kind of a weekly news, which I'm going to call Not So Obvious Watch News. It's kind of going to be my run over the target of things I've noticed in the general watch media in this hobby that maybe I think could probably maybe do with a bit of pumping or pushing forward. Some of it will be blatantly obvious, some of it will be things I stumbled upon that you might not be aware of, and every now and then I'll just have some fun with some stories and have a bit of a laugh. An experiment for me. It might work, it might not work, it might be something we keep doing, it might not. We will wait and see. One thing I should say is this is by no means going to be comprehensive. It's just stuff I found interesting and I wanted to talk about, and there's every chance you may all be as big a watch nerds as I am and that you've heard all this before and this is a boring thing going nowhere. If that is true, let me know in the comments. In doing this, I'm really going to look at three kind of things. There's a little part of me that likes to kind of structure and put things into some sort of order. So we're going to talk about sort of watch news, things about the watches that I've noticed. Then we'll talk about watch industry stuff, so stuff about companies having shows or closing or moving or whatever. And then finally we'll look at the watch media, so some things that I've kind of noticed going on within the watch media, that is YouTube, magazines, podcasts, that sort of stuff. So let's start this by talking about some interesting watch news, so some interesting new watch releases I've noticed. And really there's only one I'm going to talk about today, and that's a new Seiko Prospex diver that's been teased. It's the SBD 105. It's part of the Prospex range that was first released back in Baselworld in 2018. A series of reimaginings and re-releases based on the original 6159 7001 diver series. This has been an incredibly popular series that Seiko have done. And what they've come out with is an intensely green model here. This is kind of like seriously green all over. But I think it's really gorgeous and it's worth everyone having a look. So more on this over at Worn and Wound. Have a read. Okay, so this part of the video is going to be A, just a little bit sad, and B, I actually did some almost, God forbid, real journalism. I'm probably stretching it there, but we'll see how we go. I'm very lucky. I get to work in the centre of Melbourne, and when I'm feeling a bit sort of hemmed in by the office, I can go for a walk at lunchtime, and I do what I call my watch walk. So I head out of the office, head down towards Collins Street, walk down Collins Street, checking out the various watch emporiums, swing up, and then go through some of the little side streets that take you through some of the second-hand watch dealers, swing past the Emporium where I used to be able to see 8th Avenue watches that had a nice little range of sort of entry-level, in fact it's where this whole brand came from, not so obvious brands like OTOH and Alpina. They're gone. The shop is closed. It's vanished. Now I suspected they were having problems. They were just, when you walk past the shop and you see for sale signs up just a little bit too long, just a little bit too much stock for sale. So you had the sense that the store was circling the drain. Well, 8th Avenue's gone. 8th Avenue sort of arrived. In Australia it was part of the Lions brand. They had maybe half a dozen watch brands, maybe more, up to about 8 watch brands under their banner. At one point they had 4 retail outlets. They're all gone now. The website is still active, so this is the part where I did some real journalism. I wrote to them. In fact, I'll go back a step. I did a bit of research. I found some stories on the net saying that they were in fact winding up their operations. Some seem to indicate that they had shut down all operations as early as February this year. Now that didn't gel because I've seen the shop open since then. But I actually wrote them an email and got a response back. Their website is still up. They are still open. They are still selling watches. So if you do go to the 8th Avenue website, you will see some amazing deals. But beware, they are in the process of shutting down. What does this mean in terms of warranties and so forth? Now, there's what the law says, which means you'll be covered, but then there's reality, and is that something that's going to work out for you? I don't know. but some interesting watch news there in a young company that was apparently selling itself as going gangbusters within a couple of years, completely gone and winding up. Really interesting to compare that with some news that came out of England today, or England a couple of days ago. And in there, one of the world's big sort of retail brands, Watches of Switzerland, had an IPO, which is another sort of release of stock into the share market to try and generate some capital. And this is actually a really interesting test, because it's a test of what the market thinks of the prospects for bricks and mortar watch sales. That's what Watches of Switzerland is, and the IPO is an interesting gamble where basically the owners of the company chose to put some of it on the block and see what the market says. And in this case, it's really interesting because the market was positive. The market came back and, as is being reported on a blog to watch, gave them all thumbs up. You know, they averaged 14 to 15% increase in value based on the value of the shares traded following the IPO. So what does it mean when we take these two issues together? It's impossible to be too prescriptive because on one hand, because we know nothing about the underlying businesses. One's a small company with a couple of shops in Melbourne and Brisbane in Australia. One's a global megalith that sells watches all over the world. But I'm going to have a go at drawing a conclusion from this, and that is that selling watches from a bricks and mortar store at the entry level is going to be tough. When you're selling watches to people, when you're selling a watch for $400, $500, $600, maybe $1,000, topping out say $2,000 US dollars, right there you're right in the world where people, they feel quite comfortable buying that online. I mean, I'm taping this on a Sony A7, a camera that costs several $1,000s, and which I have no hesitation in just going to B&H, hitting click, having it sent to me, and picking it up on my doorstep, or more accurately, going down to the post office and picking up. Would I feel comfortable doing that if it was a $15,000 lens? I'm not sure. Would I be prepared to pay a $500, $600, maybe $1,000 premium to avoid any of the risks and any of the hassles associated with having a $14,000, $15,000 lens sent to me, knowing that if something went wrong, I can just walk down to, I can take it into Michael's or one of the other camera stores in Melbourne, rather than having to box it all up and send it all the way back to America. Probably spending more on postage for that one trip than I saved. Probably not. If I start getting more expensive, I'm probably happy to pay a little bit more for the product to come from Australia with the Australian warranties and with all the convenience of being able to deal with it. I suspect there's parts of that going on in the watch community as well. It's one thing to have someone send you a $500 watch, a $1,000 watch, even a $2,000 watch. But when you start looking at the kinds of watches which are sort of de rigueur for Watches of Switzerland, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, $20,000 watches, are you going to get them in the mail? Are you going to... Not only that, are you going to forego the whole AD experience of buying a $10,000 watch so that you could save $500, maybe $1,000, and have all the risks associated with the idea that if something goes wrong, you have to send it back overseas and blah, blah, blah. I suspect not. I suspect that... Oh, and sorry, I haven't even touched on, if I'm buying a $1,000 watch, I'm prepared to take a bit of a chance on the basis that I haven't actually seen that watch on my wrist. A $10,000 watch, there is no way I'm buying that over the net, sight unseen, not knowing how it's going to look when it's on my wrist. Combine all of those things, maybe there's the place for the bricks and mortar store. It's not going to be down the commodity end where people are spending a couple of $100 on a watch and they're prepared to take the kinds of risks that buying online, that's inherent in buying online. But maybe what you're looking at, if you're a bricks and mortar store, you really want to concentrate on that higher value add type space where people are going to be A, perhaps uncomfortable having it sent through the mail, B, they're going to really perhaps uncomfortable about being at the end of a very long logistics chain if they've purchased overseas and there's issues about warranty and returns. And then C, are they going to want to, if I'm spending that much, do I want that whole AD kind of relationship and AD experience when I buy my new watch? I suspect there will be a place for that very high end. Staying with the sort of watch industry news, I noticed a report in Watchpro magazine or on the Watchpro site that LVMH is clearly, who did commit to Baselworld in 2020, so 20 next year, are definitely hedging their bets by also now committing to another series of watch shows through 2020. But the main one that there's just come out with is they've committed to a major show in Dubai in the UAE in January 2020. Now this is really interesting because it means that there'll be a bunch of releases and a lot of buzz going on potentially 3 or 4 months before SIHH and Baselworld. It also means that that these guys have kind of got a second go at things. So if they're if for whatever reason things fall flat at one show, they will have subsequent shows where they can perhaps kind of tweak things, and it might mean that not everything will ride on whether you have a good Baselworld. You might have an okay Baselworld, show up, have a show, maybe deal with the fact that you weren't that spectacular and you got overshadowed, but have another go at the news cycle with essentially perhaps the same watches or the same, just some slight tweaks, another later on in the year where you get a bit more clear air. Earlier I've spoken about how I think I could see why a company like Breitling would pull out of Baselworld, because frankly the big players like Rolex just suck the oxygen out of the room, and even if you have the best Baselworld in ever, you're still just sort of eating the leftovers that certainly Rolex, probably Tudor, probably Patek, and maybe Omega have left behind. Maybe a different, and so there I was saying I could absolutely see why Breitling would just pull the pin and leave. Maybe an alternative approach for Breitling would be to say, okay, so we'll turn up at Baselworld, we'll shrink right down, we'll be there, we'll get some coverage, some hype. Frankly, we'd probably get the same number of YouTube videos, we'll probably get the same number of magazine articles if we have a very small stall without a whole lot going on as we would if we had a massive, great 4-story building. And we'll take that money and save it and have also multiple shows later in the year where we get to run all on our own. Maybe that's a better approach for companies moving forward, and that is not to pull out of Baselworld, but to shrink yourself all the way down, economize, take those savings, and then have multiple shows later. So you have this one show where the main media come in, they hit you, congratulations, you're in all the spreads, but then you can actually get to see the punters at where they live, out in Asia, out in North America, perhaps down in somewhere in the Oceania, Asia Pacific area. Now this next story, I was unsure whether I should put it in the watch media section or the watch industry section, because I think this is where we're seeing a crossover between the two. And that is a report that I recently read on Watchpro, which reported that in UK watch sales, London is losing ground. It's over the last year or so, its proportion of watch sales, or its watch sales by value, have declined by about 11%, whilst the watch sales out in Britain but outside of London have not exploded, that's probably going too far, but have certainly grown by around about 9%. So, and in particular, that movement of money in watches seems to have moved north. Now, for me, living here in Australia, it's very hard for me to understand exactly what's happened and exactly what's driven it. But I'm fairly certain that it's actually the emergence of Scottish watches. I'm pretty sure that it's Rick and Ricky on Scottish Watches. Their podcast is just dragging the entire sort of UK watch industry north, and it will probably end up somewhere around Glasgow or Edinburgh. I think one of the other great markers of this is the impact they've had on other watch media and the way that they're dragging Adrian from Bark and Jack up into Scotland. So I think it'll be really interesting looking forward to see what happens with the watch industry and just how far Rick and Ricky can drag the UK watch industry north, and can they make it all the way into the People's Republic of Scotland. Getting a bit more serious now, we'll return to the issue of watch media, and in particular now I want to talk about some things I saw on YouTube. Two videos I strongly recommend you catch, one in particular, both on the Revolution YouTube channel, so go search for Revolution and you'll find it. And what you've got is Seiko, the sort of, I think he's the chairman of the company that owns Revolution, and also the magazine The Rake, talking menswear, men's fashion, men's accessories, and with Revolution watches, obviously. Now he's interviewing Ben Klimer, the powerhouse behind Hodinkee. They do two videos. The first is talking very much about Ben and Hodinkee and the special editions. The second video, personally, I found a little bit less interesting. It's just about Ben and his watch collection, which is pretty straightforward, and it's the sort of watches you'd expect he has. So I found that less enlightening. But they're both good videos, so go check them out. There is a lot of mutual wind blowing between those two, which I probably, on one hand, is a little bit, sort of expected, but then on the other hand, what's the alternative? I think if they didn't do that, it'd blow up and become some huge Revolution versus Hodinkee thing, which I think in our community is always a risk. So, yeah, put up with the kind of, as I said, mutual blowing of wind up each other's asses, but that's kind of par for the course here. Okay, so the first video, as I said, is the more interesting one. In the first video, they spend a little bit of time talking about the creation of Hodinkee. Then they spend a fair bit of time talking about the limited editions that Hodinkee have released in partnership with the other brands. Both of those are really interesting, but there's about a minute of discussion right in the middle that for me was the most fascinating and has made me do the most thinking afterwards. And in there, Ben talks about the devil's bargain that traditional media has to make with watch companies. Traditional media makes its money, a little bit of money, by selling editions, and if you're on the internet you make essentially nothing selling your product, and you make all of your money pretty much through advertising. And that means as I said, you're in this devil's bargain with the advertisers. You need them or you die. If you aren't mostly nice to them, they won't give you advertising money, and you die. Therefore, you have to be kind of nice to them. And that creates a problem where it's very difficult to be truly independent media, because you're always kind of at the mercy of the people whose product you're reviewing. And that's a problem that car magazines, watch magazines, computer magazines, anyone who relies on advertising has had for as long as there's been magazines that have done product reviews. And that's a problem. And I think if you're running a media organization, you really do want to find a way out of that. Now, Seiko, in his Revolution, in the editorials of Revolution, has often written about this. Ben Klimer comes straight out and talks about how to break the devil's bargain, and how really he sees the way forward is by the media company becoming more than just a media company by getting involved in e-commerce, having their own products and then selling their own products. But this is where I saw a new, and so far so good. There's no problem with that. Great plan. Diversify, cut yourself loose, give yourself some more freedom. Great. Now the question becomes, and Ben said something which sort of sent my spidey sense off. The question is now, how are you going to use that freedom? Because what Ben says is, by going down this e-commerce route, by having a separate revenue channel through the sale of these limited editions, then they're cut free from their advertisers. And what he said is, so if someone's got a product we don't like, we don't have to take their advertising. Now think about what that means. If you're a company who happens to be selling stuff that Ben and his boys and girls don't like, you're screwed, because they won't even take your money. You can't get in front of your viewers. At least you can't get in front of your viewers through Hodinkee. Now, you could argue free market, blah, blah, blah. You can go somewhere else. You can use social media. All of that is absolutely true. However, that's ignoring the reality that even though there are lots and lots of other channels, places like Hodinkee, places like Revolution, places like Blog to Watch, places like Time and Tide still represent a huge block of the media that we consume. And what you have now is a huge block of that, potentially, the professional media, simply saying, you know what, if we don't like your stuff, we're not even going to cover it. And what does that mean for the diversity of stuff that we see through these people? Marketplace. How do you and I, punters, get to see kind of those less obvious, more obscure brands that these guys haven't chosen to pick because that's not what they do? In the old days, those brands could, if they wanted to, go purchase some advertising, get in front of us. They might win, they might lose, big deal. But I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with the idea that that's no longer open, that the people, the companies, the media outlets that we've traditionally relied on to show us those kinds of things that we might not have easily found, they're not going to show those things at all anymore. Maybe I'm being a little bit chicken littly. Maybe that's not what's going to happen. But I kind of got into this noticing that there was not a great deal of diversity in brands that the watch community spoke about. And I worry that we're going to see even less diversity in that coverage. I don't know. I didn't feel great about the direction that was taking. I'd always kind of thought that places like Hodinkee or places like Time and Tide or places like a Blog to Watch kind of provided an avenue, perhaps the last avenue, for non-headline act brands to at least get themselves in front of us. And maybe that's drying up. I'm not in love with it, and I found this video and the way it covered it kind of interesting. If I could sit down and have an interview with Ben, I'd love to have this discussion with him. I do note that in an interview I heard with Ariel Adams, that may well have been on the Scottish Watches website, on their podcast. I think he speaks about the dangers of when media gets involved with e-commerce and itself becomes a seller. Maybe this is what he was talking about, which is if media has the ability to pick and choose, they will pick and choose, and we will be the losers because we'll only get to see the stuff that they like. As you probably picked up, the vast bulk of all this news I actually got from other websites. I will put links to where they came from so you can actually go look at them in the notes to this video. So please go look in the description. You'll find links and go. I've got 200 people, subscribers. I do not qualify to be on people's press lists. I have not got companies sending me press releases just yet. I would love to get there. I kind of enjoy this. I enjoyed the scan and putting together something of a bulletin. So that's one of the things I would like to do. One of the reasons I want to grow the channel is so that I'm able to tap into some of that kind of more primary source media. So to help me do that, please subscribe. If I can start, you know, going to people and say I've got 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 subscribers, I'm more likely to get on a press list than if I say I've got 200. But trust me, I'm trying hard. Yeah, so do us a favor there. As I said, let me know in the comments if this was interesting. As I said, I had some fun with some of it. I'm guessing you could tell where. Thanks. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. I'll see you around. Bye.